morning, everyone. Happy 4th of July, Independence Day in America. And the United States is, well, I mean, they're a superpower. We were asking them for help, please, with that China thing. And, you know, we'll get to that in a minute. But I found this interesting. I found the choice to play this yesterday interesting. It's power in politics. And I was just scrolling through Twitter yesterday, and I saw this, and I thought, what a weird thing to play. Weird. Here we go.
Russia definitely meddled into the US elections. Russia definitely meddled into Brexit. Russia definitely meddled into a number of European elections. Russia is definitely meddling into the Ukrainian elections and into the Ukrainian political system. So Russia posed a threat to everyone. And we need to realize this and to be on the same page. So, and I strongly believe that the President of the United States fully realized this. I still strongly believe that he fully realized this.
So when you see him laugh about it, do you find that, does that undermine what you're trying to do to try and get that message out there?
The optics is not the best one.
Such a weird thing to focus on, especially in light of the Mueller report's findings that there was no collusion, no obstruction. And the whole thing about this is the charge was Donald Trump colluded with Russia to sway the outcome of the American election. And my problem, or my question, is this. Here is The Hill reporting conservatives face a tough fight as big tech censorship expands. Yeah, as big tech censorship of conservatives become even more flagrant and overt, the old arguments about protecting the sanctity of modern public square are now invalid. Our right to freely engage in public discourse through speech is under sustained attack, necessitating a vigorous defense against the major social media and internet platforms. From shadow bans on Facebook and Twitter to demonetization of YouTube videos to pulled ads for Republican candidates at the critical junctures of election campaigns, the list of violations against the online practices and speech of conservatives is long. I certainly had my suspicions confirmed when Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, quote, accidentally censored a post I made during the Jussie Smollett hoax, which consequently led me to hearing from hundreds of my followers about how they've been having problems seeing, liking, or being able to interact with my posts. Many of them even claim that they've had to repeatedly refollow me as Instagram keeps unfollowing me on their accounts. While nothing about big tech censorship of conservatives truly surprises me anymore, it's still chilling to see the proof for yourself. If it can happen to me, the son of a president with millions of followers on social media, just think about how bad it must be for conservatives with smaller followings and those who do not have the soapbox or media reach to push back when they've been targeted. Thanks to a brave Facebook whistler who approached James O'Keefe's Project Veritas, we now know that Mark Zuckerberg's social media giant developed algorithms to deboost certain content, limiting its distribution and appearances in the newsfeed. As you probably guess, this stealth censorship was specifically aimed at conservatives. Facebook appears to have deliberately tailored its algorithm to recognize the syntax and style popular among conservatives in order to deboost that content. Mainstream media, SJW, Social Justice Warrior, and Red Pill, all terms conservatives often use to express themselves, were listed as red flags, according to the former Facebook insider. Facebook engineers even cited Blaze TV host Lauren Chen's video criticizing the social justice movement as an example of the kind of red pills that users just aren't allowed to drop anymore. Mainstream conservative content was strangled in real time, yet fringe leftists, such as the Young Turks, enjoy free reign on social media platform. This was written by Donald Trump Jr. and posted in The Hill. It's American, but it's still instructive. It's interesting because the same stuff is happening in Canada, despite rules around social media, and mainly the rules are around advertising, because again, the Russian charge was that they had, the charge against the Russians for election interference was that they had purchased Facebook ads, and I think they purchased $100,000 worth of Facebook ads. And anybody in the ad business knows that's not a lot of money in ads, like not a lot at all. That's a couple of months for a medium-sized company, right? That's less than a month for a company like Coke. Like if you're looking at that much as an ad budget, that's like a month. That's maybe a regional ad budget. Like it's not even, it doesn't touch it. Here is who else could be putting their finger on our election results. Who else? Calgary Herald is reporting, well, Corbella, Krause questions why Trudeau changed charity laws for activists. This one is juicy. Really, really juicy, very interesting stuff. This was posted, when was this posted? July 4th, it was posted today. Why did Prime Minister Justin Trudeau order his revenue minister to stop the Canadian Revenue Agency from auditing politically active charities? Was it to protect his best friend and former Principal Secretary Gerald Butts? These are just two of the many questions asked by Vivian Krause during a sold-out Calgary Chamber of Commerce luncheon Wednesday at the Fairmont Pallister Hotel and during a scrum with reporters afterwards. Krause, the Vancouver-based researcher who has single-handedly exposed the foreign-funded campaign to, quote, landlock Alberta crude, which Alberta Premier Jason Kenney vows to hold a public inquiry into, pointed out that her popular blog and Twitter account are called Fair Questions because she doesn't claim to have all the answers. Toward the end of her more than 1 hour discussion, complete with numerous slides showing the paper trail behind $600 million of American money from U.S. foundations to Canadian environmental groups, to demarket Canadian oil and gas, Krause turned her attention to how questions surrounding CRA audits of political charities in Canada go, quote, right to the office of our Prime Minister. When the current government came to office, the Prime Minister characterized these audits as political harassment in his mandate letter to the National Revenue Minister, and the finalization of the political activity audits was suspended by the CRA, she told the attentive crowd of 170 charity members and their guests. Krause testified before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance about changes made by the Trudeau government to the Income Tax Act with regard to charities. The main changes to the legislation are the removal of restrictions on the extent to which charities are allowed to engage in political activity, something that was not historically allowed except by registered political parties. Suspiciously, 7 days after she testified, the CRA eliminated the online access to more than 1 million tax returns, said Krause. Every single tax return for every single registered charity for 14 years. All that historical data gone, she said, saying that only the 5 most recent years remained online. A spokesperson for the CRA reached past business hours in Ottawa on Wednesday was unable to find out why those documents were removed from the public view, but is attempting to obtain that information. Quote, this fall, we've got an election coming up, and a lot of this goes right to the Prime Minister's office, said Krause. The fact that he suspended all the political activity audits for 4 years, then changed the law retroactively, and then finalized the audits, I think that's something we need to talk about, but it's going to be very difficult unless those tax returns are restored. Krause called on Chamber of Commerce groups across the country to write letters to the CRA and to politicians to put the data back online. In practice, what this means is that some of the charities that would have had their status revoked will be off the hook because the law was changed retroactively, she told the Commons Committee. Krause said one of the findings of the CRA report was serious noncompliance unrelated to political activity, including an undue benefit. And there's a link to find out what that entails. This was what I was concerned about with regard to a payment of roughly $400,000 to the president of an environmental charity. Subsequently, the individual who received this payment, Mr. Gerald Butts, became the principal secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Mr. Butts has confirmed via Twitter that he did receive this payment as severance from the World Wildlife Fund, and after he voluntarily resigned to run Trudeau's successful 2015 federal election campaign. From the way these audits were handled, some charities and individuals may have benefited. Some of these charities and individuals have very close involvement with the office of the Prime Minister and his former principal secretary. Therefore, I believe the handling of these audits raises serious questions that merit answers, she told the committee. Krause also points out that the same U.S. foundations that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars successfully blocking Canadian energy pipelines to Tidewater also funded groups that helped Trudeau win the 2015 election. Krause showed slides that prove that foreign money moved the needle in the 2015 federal election. There's a link in this article. The link to the article will be in the description. Campaign with groups claiming credit for defeating 26 conservative incumbents. These foreign-funded groups, such as Open and Lead Now, pumped millions of dollars into Canada's federal election, a dangerous loophole in Canadian law that the Trudeau government refuses, perhaps not surprisingly, to close. Lead Now admitted that it received foreign funding before the 2015 election, but claims that money was not used in its Vote Together campaign to defeat the Harper conservative government. They didn't do this because of how we treat refugees or immigrants or First Nation people or anyone else, Krause told the crowd. This was done as part of the campaign to landlock our crude, to defeat the one political party, the Conservatives, that was committed to breaking the American monopoly that's keeping our country over a barrel, she said. Krause then showed a slide with a massive tangle of red lines representing pipelines and dots representing tankers on our coasts, which wasn't lost on the oil-friendly group to reflect on the recent passing of Bill C-48, the tanker ban, and Bill C-69, which has been dubbed the No More Pipelines Law. The only ones against which there is a multi-million-dollar, decades-long campaign are the pipelines that would take your oil to overseas markets. No campaign against Texas, she states. Why us, she asks. Why not Texas? Fair questions. We need some answers. Perhaps buts can help. So that's interesting. It's very interesting. We're very interested in foreign interference in our elections, unless you know that interference is money that helps environmental groups fight pipelines and get Justin Trudeau elected. It's really interesting how the laws and the rules are massaged with the current leadership. It's very interesting to watch, right? And it's happening. Other people are documenting these things and asking these questions. And these questions deserve answers. Toronto Sun is reporting, moving on, China just laughed in Canada's face. What now? And this is an opinion piece from Anthony Fury. Here we go. The Chinese government has now delivered what the kids today would call a sick burn against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland. The words uttered on Wednesday by China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Greg Shang, sorry if I've got that wrong, come after Trudeau and Freeland have insisted that U.S. President Donald Trump has backed up Canada over the issue of two detained Canadians, and also that they've rallied other countries to their side in the ongoing spat with Beijing and have people in their corner. Not so fast, says China. We hope the Canadians will not be too naive, says Shang. First, Canada shouldn't naively think that gathering so-called allies to put pressure on China will work. Second, the Canadian side should not naively believe that its so-called allies can really make concrete efforts for Canada's interests. What they are doing at most is lip service, because after all, it's a matter between China and Canada. This is China laughing in our faces, telling us that we don't have as many friends as we think, and that even when our so-called allies do step forward to lobby our cause, they're only doing it half-heartedly. You can even picture Trump getting to the end of a bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping and saying, after he's already stood up to leave, something like, "Oh, right, I almost forgot. So Justin from Canada wanted me to bring this up." There's something more worrisome about that statement, though, than just the basic fact that China is now at the point in these escalating tensions where they feel confident laughing at us. It's the way they dismiss this whole notion of gathering allies together to press for an outcome. By doing this, they're laughing at our whole way of viewing global affairs. Freeland speaks a lot about the rules-based international order, that this is the idea that international standards are governed by Western norms of democracy, freedom of speech, judicial independence, and so on. China doesn't care for these things, not because they're ignorant of them, and not because we haven't done enough in inviting them to join us in them, but because Xi Jinping knows what he stands for and where he wants to take his country and the rest of the world. And guess what? The rules-based international order isn't the direction the Chinese Communist Party is heading in. The Zheng Shang statement isn't just a rebuke of the current liberal government, it's a rebuke of our worldview. What then does Canada do now? For more than 6 months, China has been ratcheting up the pressure against Canada, whether it's the detention of the two Michaels, the halting of canola and meat imports, or their former ambassador's claims that we're all white supremacists and Western egotists. All of the action has been on China's side. Meanwhile, Trudeau does nothing in response. The latest insult comes just days after the G20, where Trudeau wasn't able to secure a one-on-one meeting with Xi Jinping. They snub us on the weekend and mock us during the week. Some relationship. There are two schools of thought right now in Canada about the problem. Those that do profitable business in China, as well as those in the Liberal Party, believe that this is a hiccup to be overcome and that it's back to normal. Then there are the academics, ex-diplomats, and other observers who say this is the beginning of a great reboot in our relationship with China, where we go back to the drawing board and make sure that whatever interactions we have with China are ones guided by Canadian values. And if that means lessening relations, so be it. For either outcome to happen, though, Trudeau Trudeau is going to have to do something, anything. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer recently called on Trudeau to file a complaint against China with the World Trade Organization and withdraw our funds from the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank. So far, Trudeau seems to think that back-channel diplomacy is the key solution, and that this is the one thing that China has just laughingly ruled out. Back in 2016, the Chinese gave Trudeau the nickname Little Potato. He took it as a fond label back then. Maybe it was, but now it looks like China, the world's largest consumer of potatoes, is looking to boil and mash Canada's PM. Two more for this morning, and then we're done. Here we go. National Post is reporting, let's be clear, the Liberals have, on balance, raised taxes for the middle class. This is an opinion piece, but I think it's worth noting. Here we go. Posted July 2nd, 2019. As the federal election approaches, it is imperative that facts inform the public discourse. Instead, there's unfortunately been an increase in political rhetoric from the federal government, along with some flawed reporting on taxes. On June 5th, Joel Lightbond, sorry if I've got it wrong, the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance, rose in the House of Commons in response to a question about taxation in Canada and said, quote, I find it somewhat troubling that the member for Carleton still refers to a Fraser Institute study that's been debunked by just about anyone who can read and count and who's taken 5 minutes to look at it. The study in question calculated the overall personal income tax changes made by the Liberals in 2016 shortly after they were elected. As promised during the 2015 election, the government lowered the personal income tax rate for middle-income individuals, those with earnings between $45,916 and $91,831 in 2016, from 22% to 20.5%, as the government has rightly argued. This change resulted in lower personal income taxes for Canadians with incomes in this tax bracket. However, what the government conveniently and consistently ignores is that it also eliminated a number of tax credits, income splitting, children's fitness, public transit, and children's art programs. Although eliminating these tax credits is good policy since it simplifies the tax system, their removal also acts to increase personal income taxes for Canadian families. Our study compared these savings for the middle income tax reduction against the loss of the tax credits. Overall, 81% of middle income families with children experienced a net increase in personal taxes when both the tax rate reduction and the elimination of tax credits are included in the analysis. The common response from the government, including the parliamentary secretary himself, is that the analysis ignores the changes to the Canada Child Benefit, CCB, and income transfer for families with children that the government created to absorb and expand on two previous existing programs. This response is at best disingenuous and perhaps misinformed, and at worst purposefully misleading. The government committed to lower personal income taxes for middle-income families. Now, by including income transfers such as the CCB when calculating the middle-class tax burden, the government is equating tax relief. Middle-income families keep more of their own income with government transfers funded by other people's money. Common sense and volumes of economic research reject this rationalization. Keeping more of your own money, your own income, is vastly different than receiving larger handouts from the government. And yet, the federal government continues to make this argument. Indeed, we sent queries to both Lightbound and Minister of Finance Bill Morneau regarding any study that debunked our tax analysis. While Lightbound said on the House floor it only takes 5 minutes to debunk our study, after 4 days, his office was only able to provide the same common response, which uses the government transfers, the CCB, to sustainable tax reduction. Another mistake is to ignore deferred taxes. Indeed, a recent CBC article, which evaluated this government's track record on taxation, completely ignored deferred taxes. Basic economics tell us this government can either tax today for the programs and incomes transfer they provide, or they can delay future tax increases by borrowing. Given that the Liberal government entered office with essentially a balanced budget and decided to increase borrowing, since assuming power it's incurred $75.5 billion in debt to finance new spending, it seems rather important to include these deferred taxes. While the CBC pieces rightly note that overall the Liberals have not materially increased current taxes, they've certainly increased the overall tax burden, particularly when deferred taxes are included. It's important Canadians have facts when assessing the performance of their federal government. And the facts tell us that the federal government has raised personal income taxes for the vast majority of middle-income families, while also deferring additional taxes to the future to finance more spending. Nothing the federal government has produced refutes this reality. There you go. And the last one today is kind of a funny one. National Post is reporting, and this was posted on July 2nd, not January. National Post is reporting, quote, I don't hate the guy. Alberta bar owner says stringing up Trudeau Pinata was all just in fun. Rob Newell said he isn't surprised by the online backlash, but noted there have been more bitter protests against the Trudeau government. in Red Deer, Alberta. The co-owner of a bar in central Alberta doesn't regret hanging up a large pinata of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on the Canada Day weekend. Rob Newell admits, however, that in retrospect, securing it with a rope around Trudeau's neck at Burgundy's bar and stage in Red Deer could have been done differently. The only downfall was for structural reasons. We had to zip tie the rope around his neck because someone would hit it once and it would have fallen, Newell said on Tuesday. The pinata idea was sound, he said, and customers in the bar got a kick out of it. We were just putting together Canada Day party, and I said it'd be funny to make a Justin Trudeau pinata. We filled it with money and candy and little notes of things he promised. It was all just in fun, he said. It's no surprise that people in Alberta don't like the guy, so I knew it would get some traction. Newell said if Trudeau came into his bar, he'd be served just like any other customer. I don't hate the guy. Finding a pinata of the Prime Minister wasn't easy, so Newell made it himself, he said. It turned out perfectly. Newell said he isn't surprised by the online backlash, but noted there have been more bitter protests against the Trudeau government. He pointed to a convoy of big rigs from Western Canada that drove to Ottawa in protest of a perceived lack of federal support for the oil and gas industry. I saw kids carrying signs with Trudeau on fire, and I thought, that's a little intense, Newell said. There's a lot more going on than a pinata at a party. 3 years ago, when she was Alberta's premier, a picture of Rachel Notley's face was put up on a target at an oilman's golf tournament in Brooks, Alberta. The event organizer said it was done because of frustration with the NDP government policies. The target was taken down, and he apologized a few days later. So I thought this was kind of funny. I mean, ingenuity to make that pinata yourself, eh? Looks pretty good. You could probably make a couple of bucks here selling Trudeau pinatas, Mr. Newell. Anyway, that's it for today. Check out the People's Party of Canada.ca and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks for watching, everybody.